And I think that we need to have courage to be able to discern what is authentic change from inauthentic change. I mean, I've been to, St James's Palace, and I'm someone that greatly loves tradition and the cultural history of Britain, and I respect it. On the other hand, we do have to change with the times, and there are things about the old system, the old monarchical feudal system of Britain, that absolutely need updating. I'm not convinced that the fantasy of doing everything again by royal prerogative that Theresa May came forward with, I think Theresa May is also a monarchist. She thinks that in pushing Brexit down the people of the UK, she's doing what the Queen wants, and probably the Queen is so nice and polite that she's given her that impression, and wouldn't dare to say, "Look, Theresa, are you sure this is the right thing?" I think there's a point where you have to speak the truth to this woman, Theresa May, and I think what she's doing is going to have a deleterious effect and will lead to the breaking up of the United Kingdom and a lot of suffering for a lot of people. The Queen herself, being quite elderly, won't live long. She won't see the after effects of it. And I think that she should think very carefully about what kind of legacy she wants to leave behind. Does she want to be remembered as the Queen that saw the break-up of the United Kingdom, that allowed this rabid, ignorant and over-enthusiastic Prime Minister to push Brexit down the throats of a very reluctant population, urged on by extreme right and extreme left bigots, which is what they are? I don't think that's a legacy the Queen would want to leave, myself. And I'm appealing to her innate good sense and common decency, and also her role as head of the church. I don't think that's a Christian route to take. And I've explained why I think that Brexit is coming much more from a position of what I would call the Antichrist, or, anti-love. So, I think that's enough from me. I want to just point out a couple of other interesting things about today, because I'm a great lover of synchronicity, and I'm a great student of the synchronicity of time and history, and my PhD in this psychology of history to do with transpersonal meaning in history. I find it interesting that today, 30th of January, is the day on which King Charles I was beheaded. Now, he was the only king of England ever to be tried publicly and executed as a traitor, tyrant, murderer, etc. I don't agree with that execution. I would have voted against it. I would have been a very moderate person trying to bring peace in that tragic civil war. And like Lord Herbert of Cherbury, who was one of my intellectual heroes, who wrote the book De Veritate and was one of the launchers of the metaphysics of deism in British intellectual and European history. Prince Rupert was one of my heroes as a boy. I'd charge around the garden being Prince Rupert and so on. Lewis Crescent in Kent Town. So no, I absolutely wouldn't agree with that terrible murder that was done. And in the Church of England, Charles is revered as a martyr. However, I would say that, if monarchs misbehave, if they don't act always in the interests of the collective, if they only act in the interests of their class and their elite group, if they're seen to do that, then this is what happens to them. And it happened to the French monarch, it happened to the Russian, and so on. I think monarchs have a special duty. I mean, I say in my letter to the Queen, actually, that I remind her that the very best monarchs used to go among the common people dressed incognito. King Alfred the Great of Wessex, he's one of my heroes, he used to dress up in just peasant costume and go and wander about among ordinary people. There's the famous incident of him in the cottage in disguise. King Wenceslas did the same. He was incognito. There have been several caliphs in Islamic history who did the same. Harun al-Rashid used to dress up as just a normal street person and go out in the bazaars and things. That to me is a true monarch who wants to know what's happening at the grassroots, what's going on in with the poor, what's going on with normal people struggling to make ends meet. And if you don't do that, then you end up, as Charles did tragically on this day. And so it's a an interesting synchronicity that happens to be on this day. Also, in 1933, on the 30th of January, is when Hitler assumed power in Germany. So that's another tragic route. If you don't solve the problems peacefully, the Weimar Republic was trying, but the way that the Allies imposed on Germany after the war, as Keynes said, such huge reparations, it sort of created the conditions for World War II. What we should always be doing is thinking through how to bring peace to a society, not how to extract as much as we can from it. And I mean, they should have created some kind of European Union at the end of World War I, in my opinion, and locked the economies of Europe in together. It was only done after the yet subsequent tragedy of World War II. The only reason Hitler was elected to power, one of, was because he had the backing of international corporate interests, such as in America, who were backing the Nazis right up until Roosevelt finally, declared. Well, actually, it was Hitler that declared against Roosevelt after Pearl Harbor. But after the war broke out, the Bush family and so on were trading with Nazi Germany and their banking interests right up until then. So, I'm for peace, as peace druid of Britain and Europe. Hitler was a total tragedy, but it was a tragedy that could have been prevented at several points along the way by the application of intelligent, precautionary wisdom working. And that's what I'm saying about Brexit. I foresee tremendous catastrophes arising if it's implemented. But we can do sufficient wisdom working. We have 60 days, 2 months, to stop the breakup of the United Kingdom. Please think this through, reflect on what I'm saying, and get in touch. I'm happy to talk publicly. I'm happy to organise meetings, do a lecture tour, whatever. I will do whatever I can to stop this catastrophe. I would also like to point out that in 1882, this day, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born. What an amazing synchronicity, right? And he came into power democratically on the left. He was a centre-left kind of guy, a Woody Guthrie hero, who was able to defeat Hitler and the kind of fanaticism and anti-democracy that he stood for, the mobocracy. And he was a lover of intellectuals, Roosevelt. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, whose book, autobiography I'm reading at the moment, was herself, had studied part of her life in France. She'd learned to speak French as a child. She went to a French-speaking school in London before World War I. She was a highly cultured woman, Eleanor Roosevelt. And they made a formidable couple. They're what I call a wisdom affair. And she became the first chair of the UN Department of Human Rights in the newly founded United Nations, which her husband Roosevelt had created, really, in alliance with Churchill and others. I find it shocking and tragic that America, apparently, the USA, has just pulled out of UNESCO, yet again, following Israel. What on earth are they doing? I was in the UNESCO headquarters recently for a meeting of the World Intellectual Forum. We should be supporting UNESCO in its work, not doing this grandstanding. It's part of this anti-intellectualism that is behind Brexit and that is behind Trump. And I would say it's not worthy of us as human beings. We do have minds, we do have the capacity to think, and we need to apply that to solving our political problems, not just doing gestures. And also the other thing that happened on this day, and I'll just finish with this, is that there was a suicide in Meiringen on the 30th of January when Archduke Rudolf, the only son of the Emperor Franz Joseph and heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, in 1889 committed suicide with his girlfriend. He placed a pistol to the temple of his beautiful 17-year-old girlfriend lying next to him in the bed and pulled the trigger. And then a few hours later he turned the gun on himself. And they discovered these two young lovers in the hunting lodge at Meiling, dead. In 1889, he left a suicide note saying, "I know I'm unworthy to be your son," addressed to his mother. Now, the tragedy of this story, it's a psychological thriller, is that he'd been forced to marry a bride that he didn't really love. And she was a Belgian princess. They had a daughter, but no happiness. It was an arranged marriage. Whereas this woman, Baroness Maria von Wetzera, he'd absolutely fallen head over heels in love with. And this is the woman on the bed with him when they both die. The moral of the story is that the parents should have realised that love is more important than duty and, stiff upper lip and all that. Because what happened was, because Rudolf killed himself, Archduke Franz Ferdinand took over as Crown Prince. And 25 years later, Franz Ferdinand and his wife were assassinated in Sarajevo, which then was the cause of World War I. I'm just saying, as a historian, if some magic had been done, and that poor prince and his girlfriend had, imagine the mother and father burst into the room and said, "Don't kill yourself, we love you, it's all right, you can have a divorce and you can marry your girlfriend, everyone live happily ever after." And it would have ended like a Hallmark romance movie with everyone, dancing in the ballroom at night. I personally prefer happy endings to films. That's why I like romantic comedies. Whereas what we have here in history is a whole series of tragedies. No, they didn't come in. The poor chap killed his girlfriend. I mean, can you imagine having to do that and then killing yourself? It's mind-boggling. And then his successor as Crown Prince is eventually himself killed. And we go into the tragedy of World War I. Everywhere we look, there's tragedies. There's that happening on this day. There's King Charles being beheaded, who was a very cultured and a learned man. Charles was a great man, actually. He's had a terrible press. His one mistake was, instead of talking about the divine right of kings, he should have talked about the divine duty of kings. It's a semantic difference with a vast implication. He kept going on about, you don't have the right to try me here. You can't sentence me, you don't have the right. I have the divine right because I'm king. He hadn't been educated enough to be able to say, look, I have to do my duty as the monarch. I have a divine duty as a king to be just, to be courageous, to, stand up to bullies, etc., etc. No, public opinion and philosophy was not advanced enough in the 1640s to have that conversation yet. But we are now. And that's why I'm speaking and appealing to people to think through the implications of Brexit, because it's yet another tragedy. I don't want to read in the history books 100 years from now in some future life, Brexit happened and nobody did anything to stop it. The tragedies unfolded, Scotland left the Union, there was another 20 years fighting in Ireland, etc., etc., etc. No, I'm doing my best to say, let's have a happy ending, folks. And the only way I can see it is a second referendum. Okay, I'm gonna finish by going back to the Psalm and doing a tiny little commentary, because all this has been a preamble, really. So, of kindness and justice I sing. Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to be kind. I'm saying, let us as a nation, let the United Kingdom, let Europe, let us speak with kindness and also justice. Because what's being done in Brexit is neither kind nor just. It's unkind to our European neighbours. It's unkind to the Brits living in Europe. It's unkind to the majority of people that didn't vote for Brexit. And it's not just, because it's ignoring the wishes of the people of Scotland, it's ignoring the wishes of the people of Northern Ireland, neither of whom voted for Brexit. So, no, we need to sing now of kindness and justice. To you, O Holy One, I make melodies. I love that line. It's so simple. And that's what we should all be doing. You know, this is the music room in the Museum of the Muses. This is the room of Apollo. This is the room we make music in. And music is the language of the gods, really. The Muses. This place where I'm speaking is also called the Museum of the Muses, because they're the divine underwriters or guarantors of true thought, as Plato said when he declared the academy sacred to the Muses. I'm just walking in that light. I study the path of simplicity. I love that line. Again, it's beautifully expressed, because the point of spirituality is to boil things down to the kernel. It doesn't mean it's not complex, like a nut. A nut is incredibly simple. It's just, you know, a little blob of stuff. But inside it are all the DNA, the codes, the things that will grow up into an oak tree, or in the sense of a seed in the womb of a female woman. That's me, that's you. We grow out of that simplicity. All our complexity is there. The point about the path of simplicity is that it's the Zen path to enlightenment. It's finding that absolute truth that cuts through all the nuances. The problem with the debate in Parliament yesterday is it's so complex, all these different, you know, amendments and A, B, C, D, etc., and nobody quite knows what's going on. They've lost the path of simplicity. The simple fact is Brexit is bad for the United Kingdom. It's going to lead to its breakup. That's what the Scots who are sitting down here keep pointing out, and nobody listens. You know, these are the Narnians who actually can see through time and space, and these dwarves don't know what's going on. They haven't got a clue. So, and then it goes on, how long until you come to me? In other words, we're waiting for truth here throughout the UK. I mean, either we're a country dedicated to God in the deepest, truest sense of the word, or we're not. If it turns out we're not, and we're just a country of buffoons and charlatans and fake Christians and tinsel-barbed Christians, then I don't want anything to do with that country. That's just yet another country lost to history. I thought we were more than that. I thought we actually cared about truth and honour and fair play. You know, I thought those values I was taught as a kid actually meant something. I would like to see the British people rise up and reclaim those values and you know, and fight for our country through peace and non-violence and intellectual debate and thought, so that divine spirit, if you want, can come back to us, because we're in danger of losing it in this fractious, you know, tinsel-barbed debate of, you know, kind of winning on points. I found the behaviour of the Tory MPs yesterday shocking. They were braying like donkeys, and every time they won an amendment, you know, a wink and a nudge, they knew, so they started cheering. You know, they're like the worst kind of behaved schoolboys that I've ever known, and I've been a teacher in many such. I was embarrassed by their behaviour. The psalm goes on, I've lived in my house with a clear heart. I have not placed before my eyes things of no worth. It's very important that each of us should be able to say that as we go to sleep at night. I love the service of evensong in the Church of England and other churches. You know, in the evening you should have like an evensong and be able to say, I've done my best this day with a clear heart, and I've not placed before my eyes things of no worth. That's incredibly important line in the psalm, because that's the trouble. We're all placing things of no worth in front of ourselves all the time, with trivia, with things of not significant import, and then we lose sight of the things that really matter and have value. We're about to lose our country for what? For some fantasy referendum that David Cameron called so that he could assuage the right wing of his party. I mean, What a shocking kind of, what a shocking outcome for history. Those who swerve from you, I've stayed from them distant. Well, I think we need to say that. We need to befriend people that are focused on truth here. And that have the courage to speak out. And there are people. There's that wonderful Brexit man who's camped outside Parliament. There's my dear friend, the late Mark Williams, who I think was murdered for his anti-Brexit activism. He was an activist outside Downing Street. And there are many others. I'm an intellectivist, so I'm not, walking up and down outside Downing Street waving placards, but I'm doing it intellectually. None of it clings to me. A twisted heart, I've turned from it away. Evil, I do not study its path. This is so amazingly written, and we all have to do this. We have to turn to the good. I have studied evil, and I have written about comparative diabology, and I've looked at, the Hitlers of history and so on, because as a historian I have to. But I do so in order to help heal it. And that's why I've looked at the dark occult side of Brexit and where it's come from, because I want to shine some light on it so that it can be healed. I've never been against, when I was a teacher I was taught not to be against people that misbehave, students, but to be against their behaviours. So I believe that redemption is possible even for people who've walked a long way down the path of evil. Then there are those who slander, those who speak slander of their neighbour in secret. I will humble them to silence. The world is far too full of that. Everywhere you look, Facebook, the internet, etc., people are speaking ill of each other. It's shocking. We ought to be, as I love this phrase, humbling them into silence, simply by saying, no, folks, let's look at virtue, let's look at truth. Listen to my commentaries on the Gospels, read my commentaries on the Quran, read my commentaries on the books of Enoch, the sacred texts of humanity. And hopefully you'll contact again that true silence where God speaks to us. And by God I mean the absolute, the enlightened, enlightenment overseer of all of us. The haughty eye and unsatisfied heart, they're unable to know you. Well, obviously, arrogance cannot know truth. And this is my concern about the Queen. I'm worried about, and the people that are sort of allowing Brexit to happen. Because they're sort of used to power, they maybe have lost their moral compass a bit. And they don't realise the implications of this for ordinary people. And so they're letting it go on because, it's just another problem, another power thing, No, it's not. This one is huge. And the same with Trump and his arrogance. Scares me because the man doesn't seem to realise that his policies are, causing real upset to people. And his wall against Mexico is the most stupid idea. Instead, they should build a peace museum on the frontier, telling the story of Mexican-American wars over the centuries, and use the money that they save on building the Nonagon on top of the Pentagon as a top floor. That's what Eleanor Roosevelt would want. The trouble is, people of arrogance, they don't know the absolute. They can't find it. As the Taoists say, it's as common as water, because it always seeks the lowest level. So if you're arrogant up on the top of the mountain, you won't reach the river floor, you won't reach the valley. And God, the Tao, lives in the spirit of the valley. That's much more the goddess or feminine aspect of the divine. My eyes are upon the world's faithful, so they might dwell at my side. Well, I'm saying exactly the same, this broadcast is for the world's faithful. I don't know how many of us are left. It seems not many. I love Facebook and the internet because it manages to bring us together, but not enough, you know. So my broadcast is to all the world's faithful. And I love this verse in the Psalms. Because, so they might dwell at my side. Well, we all need to be at each other's side, backing each other up in this work of faith, which is pistis, which is fides, which is recognizing the duty that each of us has to the architect of supreme virtue and wisdom and love. You know, we have a duty to fulfill our mission, each one of us. And it looks like mission impossible. You know, we're all Tom Cruise, you know, halfway up a mountain, got one ice pick hanging off a cliff, and they're shooting at us from a helicopter. You know, that's kind of where we're all at. You just got to keep the faith. And as each of us succeeds in our own personal area, collectively we can succeed. Those who help the path of those who walk the path of simplicity will be my help. So each of us, as we try and unpair our ignorant complexity and boil it down to the bone of truth and love and goodness, then we're all helping each other have that victory. As my friend Rupert Sheldrake says, you know, as each of us learns as monkeys to wash the potatoes, so magically somehow it becomes easier for us, all of us scattered around the island. So with the pursuit of virtue and peace, as each of us achieves that state of simplicity, and for which I think prayer, meditation and sacred study are important, then all of us can get there. And nobody need be left out. You know, my problem with Brexit is it's very kind of it's very exclusivist. I want an inclusive Europe and an inclusive world. Those who profess faith while acting unjustly, they do not dwell in my house. And this was the point Berdyaev made as a philosopher in Russia, that to be authentic as a Christian doesn't mean going to church, doesn't mean taking the sacraments, doesn't mean gesticulating in a certain way or anything. It's about acting justly as a manifestation of faith. And I think the same with the whole thing over Brexit. I think the parliamentarians of the Tory party and their allies are misusing Parliament to push through something that is against the will and against the best interests of the British people. And they're misusing the mechanisms of Parliament in spite of the best intentions of you know, the opposition, because they're in too muted a voice. Corbyn doesn't have the intelligence, literally, to work out how to stop this. And he doesn't have the moral intelligence to realise that that's an absolute duty. As leader of the opposition, forcing a second referendum should be his absolute duty. That's his marching order, and he doesn't realise it. He's completely out of his depth. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, Vincent Cable, does realise it. But because he has not enough MPs, and because he's quite a shy and retiring kind of character, he's not really a great orator, he has no real inspirational verve, as Nick Clegg did, he's not able to put the case in Parliament with sufficient authority and gravitas that people take it seriously. And even though he knows what's right, he can't express it properly, which is a real problem. Because he ought to be the guardian of the British people's native common sense. Instead, we have people that are acting unjustly, stealing the thunder. Those who speak deceit do not remain before my eyes. God, you know, so many people in positions of power speak deceit. I dread to think what goes on in Westminster behind the scenes, in Downing Street, in the cabinet. These people are stabbing each other in the back all the time, let alone you know, the British people. These so-called politicians have made deceit a way of life, and the game is to speak deceit in the right way that advances your career, and then trip up the other guy when they speak deceit and prove it and get lawyers involved and destroy them. It's going on in America too. I'm saying enough of all this. These people who speak deceit should not remain before our eyes. And the only way to get rid of that is to make it an offence to speak deceit in any parliamentary chamber anywhere in the world. All politicians, whether in India, Greece, Britain, Ireland, America, France, wherever, the European Union Parliament, should have to, by law, speak truth on any official business. And if they speak deceit, they immediately lose their post. I mean, to me, I'm speaking as a druid, an archdruid, that is absolute basic common sense. You can't have people in political power who are liars and who speak deceit, and yet now we're surrounded by them everywhere. And we were in the days of King David. It's very sad. Every morning, in my mind, I wipe the wicked from the earth. As if it were that simple. I mean, it's poetry, these are psalms, right? But it's a lovely idea that you could wake up in a beautiful, fresh world where there's nobody of evil. Today it snowed here in France, and I woke up. There's this beautiful light which you get when there's snow on the ground, and everything is bright and shining, like a new day. The sort of thing that Dylan Thomas would write a great poem over. And I remember my Christmases in the Gower in Wales when I was falling in love with poetry. That sense of newness about everything. Yes, that's what we should have, that going back to the core love that we all come from. And it ends with this wonderful verse. He says, I wipe the wicked from the earth, imagining a day when all who bring sorrow will vanish from the city of God. Gosh, that's like a Brahms symphony coming to an end, those amazing beats that come at the end of the Fourth Symphony. It's fascinating that Augustine's phrase, the city of God, is prefigured here in the Psalms, because most of us think of the phrase city of God, it's a Christian Augustinian phrase. No, it's a psalmic phrase. The text says the city of Yahweh, but the city of God is the real translation of that. And I would love it that all who bring sorrow vanish from the city of God. Now, to me, Parliament, I organised 30 meetings in Parliament on ethics and peace. London is my hometown in many ways. My university degree is from there, my PhD. I love London. It should be the city of God. I love all other cities. I mean, every city in the world where I've studied, New York, Paris, San Francisco, Delhi, wherever, Jaipur, I could give you the huge list, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and so on. All the cities of the world should be the city of God. And wouldn't it be lovely if we could imagine a day when all those that bring sorrow vanish away from it? That's the work of philosophy, that's the work of education, that's why I'm sharing these thoughts. I believe that Brexit is going to cause tremendous sorrow to the people of the city of God, will lead to the breaking up of our beautiful kingdom, and lead to the resumption of fighting and war in Ireland, and lead to tremendous turmoil and problems between Scotland and the rest of the country. And this is turmoil in the kingdom of God, or the city of God. So what I'm saying, like the psalmist here, is no, let's vanish away the things that are going to be causing all that turmoil. Doesn't mean getting rid of people. Doesn't mean shooting the other guys. It means transforming the attitudes and the thoughts that cause sorrow. I know quite a few people that once supported Brexit have changed their views now. They've realised, they've thought it through, and they've had a kind of rebirth experience. They've realised, no, actually, that's not the best solution. I know people have been fanatically for Brexit and have now realised, after deep thought,